Continue to give a reaction to the passing on of the AmaZulu King, Goodwill Zwelithini, and I'm joined by the IFP leader, Velenkosini Hlabisa. Sorry about that, I'm sort of getting lost in some of the text that I'm reading here, Mr. Hlabisa. As they say in isiZulu, kwahlwemini kwaZulu, there are really no words to capture the passing on of a king in many of the African contexts, right? Because we don't even have a word to say, we don't speak of a king dying, because we can't even conceive of a king dying, because if the king dies, it means the kingdom dies. How are you making sense of what has happened today?
First of all, Thulasizwe, let me, on behalf of the IFP, express our sadness and condolences to the royal family, the Zulu nation, and all people of South Africa for this sad loss of the sad news of the passing of His Majesty King Goodwill Zwelithini Zulu. The nation remains poor. His Majesty the King has reigned almost 50 years, and he was a symbol of the Zulu nation as he was exemplary in his life in restoring the values and the culture of the Zulu nation.
Right. But Hlabisa, I'm going to pause our conversation for the moment, respectfully, sir. And I do that because I want to bring in eNCA's, we will continue in just a moment, you and I. But I want to bring in eNCA's Siphamandla Goge, who is joined by Umntwana waphindangene, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, just for more reaction and sort of to speak to him a bit more about what has happened this morning. Siphamandla.
Indeed, Thulasizwe lishonile ilanga kwaZulu, as the Zulu saying will go, kuhlwemini kwaZulu, imbube, ikhotheme, uhambile umdlokombane. But right now we will be joined by Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who is the traditional Prime Minister of AmaZulu. I can tell you that he's ready to speak to us so that we'll get more reaction from him. Mntwana, thank you very much for your time. Lishonile ilanga kwaZulu. Tell us about the passing of His Majesty.
I thank eNCA for giving me the opportunity to announce the sad news of the passing away of our King, His Majesty, King Goodwill Zwelithini Zulu, Solomon Zulu, Kampande, the King of the Zulu Nation, and now announcing on behalf of the Zulu royal family that sadly, in spite of all the efforts that were made, there was a whole Professor Nyamande, with a team of more than 20 doctors, including the Minister of Health, who had a very hands-on approach, because several times he went to the hospital himself and went into the ICU himself, and actually everything was done to try and save the life of our king. And that's what makes us very sad, that he should have suffered for so long. But on behalf of the royal family, I'm announcing that in the early hours of this morning, sadly, he passed away. And early this morning, His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Mr. Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, also conveyed his sympathies to the royal family, including other ministers, the Minister of Health, Honorable Dr. Zwelithini, including the Minister of Culture, Dr. Nkosazana Zuma, including the Minister of Police, Mr. Pegicele, including our Premier of the province, Mr. Sitha Zigalala, including the Treasurer of the ANC, Mr. Mashatile. All of them expressed their condolences, and once the royal family has met, we will announce the date of the King's interment. The interment of the King's mortal remains. But in the meantime, the royal family is going to make the opportunity for the king's body to lie in state at his Kwakheto Mthandayo palace, so that whoever wants to pay respects can do so before his burial.
You mentioned Kwakheto Mthandayo Palace. Sorry, Shenge, but you were there when the king's father passed away. You are here today announcing the passing on of the king. Kwakheto Mthandayo is his father's place. But also, let's talk about personally, what does this mean to you? Surely it's very difficult for you, because ever since you have always been there with the king.
I'm devastated. When we're together, when we're talking, whenever we joke, the two of us, I always reminded him that I knew my cousin, His Majesty King Peguzulu. Before he got married, I knew my cousin because the king's queen, who is buried here in Durban, Queen Thomozile Jezengani Ndwande, was my first cousin too. And I always said I knew both my cousins before they even got married. And it's a devastating thing for me to actually be the one that is now involved in the burial, when I expected him, in fact, to bury me. That's how it goes, not the other way around. So I'm absolutely devastated by his passing away, especially happening when actually we're going to celebrate his 50th Jubilee this year.
He was looking forward to that Jubilee. I remember in December I interviewed him. He told me about the Jubilee. In fact, he invited me to that Jubilee. But what now? What happens now during this period while we wait for the king to be laid to rest? What will happen moving forward?
No, but I've already said that he's lying in state and the burial afterward. Nothing else is going to happen.
Mntwana, I'm sorry, but I have to ask this. I know it's very sensitive at this stage. The issue of succession in the Zulu kingdom is not publicly discussed. But what can you tell us about that? When will that discussion take place as to who will be the next king of AmaZulu?
That is a matter which the royal family will be seized with now. It's not a matter which I can say anything about, because the royal family hasn't got together to actually mention what's going to happen, whether it's going to be any regent or whatever, or whether any of his children. I don't know. The king never discussed with me about that matter of his succession.
How should AmaZulu remember their king?
Well, I think that the king should be remembered for the fact that he had a hands-on approach. Because if there is one gospel that we shared with him, it was the gospel of self-help and self-reliance. Nothing made us sadder than the fact that ever since 1994, our people abandoned producing food for themselves. And the biggest challenge, especially with so much unemployment, is the fact that people is the actually food security. So the king actually did not talk about it, but he actually did it himself. He farmed and he did these things to show that they can be done. So I'm very saddened by the fact that he has been a moral voice for our nation, even on issues that are in the public discourse. So we'll miss his moral voice, because he was actually very outspoken about what should be done and what should not be done.
And on the question of land, he was very clear about that one, the return of land to the people. The land question, he did all he could to protect the land, and recently he was so vocal on the issue of land in South Africa.
Of course he was. In fact, it's history that he was a trustee of Ngonyama Trust land, because we created the trust so that the land should actually be something that should actually be under his supervision. And thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much. That is Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who is the traditional prime minister of the Zulu nation. He is the one who has had to make that sad announcement about the passing of AmaZulu king, Goodwill Zwelithini Kapeguzulu Oga Bushobkali Thulasizwe Simelane. Let me tell you that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi did have his mask, but he has to remove it for audio purposes because of advanced age. So he was masked up, Thulasizwe. And let me tell you that from here, it looks like it's going going to be a very busy day for Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, as my colleague Ubonga Mkhize will be showing you the entourage that is with the Prince here. From here, he needs to go to the hospital where the King passed away, and from there he needs to go back to the Royal Palace of Gwakheto Mthandayo. That is the palace of the King's father, and that's where everything will be done. Thulasizwe, as Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has already told you, that the King's mortal remains will lie in state there at the Gwakheto Mthandayo Royal Palace. We are talking about the longest serving monarch of the Zulu nation here. He was looking forward to that 50th anniversary of him being in the throne. Thulasizwe, last year in December, we did speak about that, and he made that comment and that invite to me in the context of gender-based violence. He was addressing an event where he was speaking about gender-based violence in South Africa, and he said the best gift that his nation will give him is to ensure that they protect women and children, they end gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa. And he said his jubilee was going to be dedicated at that thing.
All right, Siphamandla, I would want us to, at a later stage, go into a bit more detail and have a bit of a conversation about the special relationship that you personally enjoyed with the late King Goodwill Zwelithini Zulu. But we won't do that just yet, because I am still joined by the IFP leader, Velenkosini Hlabisa, just to continue with his reflections on that. You heard the Siphamandla speaking to the Prime Minister of the AmaZulu Kingdom, Inkosi Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Mr. Hlabisa, thank you for your accommodation and for your understanding when we had to take that moment and speak to Inkosi Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Let's talk a bit about the role of the late King Goodwill Zwelithini around political stability and cohesion within KwaZulu-Natal, within AmaZulu in general. I was saying earlier on in a comment that politics can and is usually fractious, and I think KwaZulu-Natal is really the best example that we've seen in the last few decades of how political differences can be so devastating to the point of violence. Talk to me about his role in being that pillar around which people could gather and converge and say, despite our political differences, this is where we converge as AmaZulu.
His Majesty, the King of the Zulu Nation, has been an exemplary leader of accommodating and protecting every political view within the society of KwaZulu in South Africa. His Majesty the King was open to all leaders, and he was always preaching peace, even during the time of violence. He never took side with one political party against others, but he was always calling for peace, for unity, for cooperation and coexistence. That is what will make him missed most in our country, because very few leaders of his status are always accommodating and do not exclude others and only accept others. That will be a remarkable trait he will leave behind us as South Africans, which we feel even all the traditional leaders under the institution of the Zulu monarch, as well as other royal household, should play a similar role of allowing freedom of expression and not take a side, but accept everybody as a party that has a right to exist, but share coexistence with others.
Lastly, Mr. Hlabisa, talk to me about the state of the, the AmaZulu nation as we speak right now. In what state does he leave AmaZulu? Given the developments that have happened in as far as the establishment of a constitutional democracy, with the result that, strictly speaking, we can only speak of one nation being South Africa, but at the same time you have a very large population that identifies with pride and identifies themselves as AmaZulu, and there's a whole lineage that's there. a lineage of pride, of battles won, of struggles that have been waged over the centuries, and a proud history as well. But with modernization and people being scattered in various parts of the country and even of the world, what's the state of the AmaZulu right now, and what should they be? How should they be reflecting on the passing on of Isilo Samabandla?
Isilo Samabandla will be remembered for his contribution because he reigned during the era of apartheid, and he fought with the Zulu nation and the people of South Africa against apartheid up until 1994, when we all achieved freedom as the people of South Africa. He carried on and promoted equality, as you know, especially the issue of gender-based violence, because it is a common practice that women are inferior to males. But the king of the Zulu nation became a champion of promoting equality between the gender in South Africa, and also he led a campaign against the violence directed to women. Unfortunately, the king leaves us at the time where the issue of land was not yet resolved. I only hope that the South African government will honor His Majesty the King by resolving the land issue, which is known by everybody, that the issue around Ingonyama Trust, which is the land entrusted to be looked after by His Majesty on behalf of the Zulu nation, is still hanging in the balance. That is the only area which I think the government of South Africa will pay an according tribute to the king if they will resolve the issue of land within the Zulu nation, as the king of the Zulu nation was a champion in wanting to ensure the protection of the land right of his people.
All right, I've got to thank you for your time there. That's the IFP leader, Velenkosini Hlabisa, paying tribute to the late AmaZulu king, Goodwill Zwelithini. In fact, let's continue.